Rome, November 17th, 1982. 10:47 p.m. The night air over Termini Station was soaked in diesel fumes and cold drizzle. Passengers shuffled beneath yellow lights, unaware that amid the hum of engines, a shadow war was quietly unfolding. Inside the last carriage of the Milan-bound express, a man known to few as Fareed Warisi adjusted his cufflinks and stared into the window's reflection. The rhythm of the tracks masked the pulse of danger that followed him relentlessly. In another compartment, two passengers spoke softly in Hebrew-accented Italian, pretending to read newspapers. Their watches were synchronized to the second. To them, this wasn't travel, it was theater. And Warisi, the PLO's elusive intelligence chief, was center stage. Outside, Rome's suburbs blurred into darkness. The train gathered speed, slicing through the wet countryside. Beneath that mechanical calm, something lethal was in motion. A plan years in the making, authorized in Tel Aviv, and destined to end in silence. Few aboard knew the stakes. To some, Warisi was a diplomat. To others, a mastermind of terror. To the Mossad team, he was unfinished business, a ghost from Beirut whose capture could rewrite the balance of vengeance and survival. As the clock neared midnight, a faint click echoed in the corridor, metal brushing against metal. The agents exchanged a glance. Outside, the rain thickened. Inside, history inched toward an invisible trigger that would change the Middle East forever. If stories of real espionage thrill you, of agents who moved unseen through Europe's underbelly and the operations that reshaped nations, this one will grip you to the end. The hunt for Fareed Warisi isn't just history. It's a mirror to how far power will go to defend itself. Before we dive deeper, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you believe truth is stranger than fiction, like this video so more curious minds can uncover the secret history of the Mossad's silent war. He was known by many names, but to the intelligence community, Fareed Warisi was the mind behind the PLO's most elusive networks, a man who turned secrets into weapons. Born in Sidon, Lebanon, he rose through the ranks not by violence, but by intellect. Fluent in 6 languages, Warisi was the invisible architect of operations that haunted Israel's borders through the 1970s. To Mossad, he wasn't just an enemy. He was the ghost who always vanished a second before the strike. Every failed attempt to catch him deepened his myth. A myth that embarrassed Israeli intelligence and emboldened their adversaries across Europe and the Arab world. But who truly was Fareed Warisi, a patriot defending his cause, or a mastermind pulling strings behind bloody curtains? And what drove Israel's most secret agency to risk international scandal by hunting him on foreign soil, inside a moving train through Rome? To understand that night, the rain, the silence, the ticking watches, we must understand the world that created it. The Cold War was still shaping loyalties. Europe was a playground for spies. And in the shadows of embassies and safe houses, both the PLO and Mossad played their deadliest game: recognition versus revenge. That hunt, unfolding on steel rails under the Italian night, was not just an act of retaliation. It was a message, whispered through espionage channels and coded cables, that no one, not even the most untouchable, could outrun consequence. It was 1982, a year when the world teetered between détente and disaster. The Cold War had turned the Mediterranean into a silent arena of proxy conflicts, where every port city hummed with spies, double agents, and shadow deals. The Middle East, meanwhile, was still reeling from Israel's invasion of Lebanon that summer, an operation meant to dismantle the PLO's foothold in Beirut, but which scattered its operatives across Europe like embers waiting to ignite. In Tel Aviv, the memory of Munich 1972 still haunted policymakers. For Israeli intelligence, the PLO wasn't just a political entity. It was an ever-shifting hydra that threatened not only Israel's borders, but its global legitimacy. Mossad had spent years dismantling that hydra one head at a time, from Beirut's backstreets to Athens' cafes. Yet one figure remained: Fareed Warisi, the man who had built the PLO's intelligence apparatus and, some claimed, coordinated covert networks in Rome, Paris, and Vienna. Across the sea, the Palestinian movement was fractured. After the expulsion from Beirut, Yasser Arafat's headquarters had moved to Tunis, while cells loyal to different factions operated independently across Europe. Intelligence reports spoke of safe houses in Rome, Milan, and Marseille, places where false passports were printed, couriers met, and plans exchanged over espresso and cigarette smoke. The Americans watched but did not interfere. Washington's attention was consumed by the Iran-Iraq War and the shifting sands of the Reagan Doctrine. The Soviets, meanwhile, armed clients and whispered through the Eastern Bloc, feeding information where it hurt the West most. In this tangled web, Italy, with its porous borders, chaotic politics, and deep communist sympathies, became neutral ground for spies of every flag. And within that chaos, Mossad found both opportunity and peril. Every mission on European soil risked scandal, even collapse of alliances. But to Jerusalem's war cabinet, the assassination of Israeli diplomats and agents abroad was no longer tolerable. Retaliation wasn't just vengeance, it was deterrence. Rome would soon become the silent stage where two ideologies collided, one born of survival, the other of resistance. They called it a task for a small team, surgical, untraceable, and respectful of deniability. The plan was initiated at the highest levels of Israel's intelligence community, a compact circle inside Mossad's operations directorate that had been tracking Warisi for years. For them, he was not a headline but a node, an operational brain whose continued freedom allowed cells to coordinate attacks and evade arrest across Europe. The directive was explicit: bring Warisi back to Israeli custody alive if possible. If not, make certain he could no longer direct operations. That framing shaped every choice that followed. Intelligence work began long before the train departure. Analysts pored over travel manifests, intercepted communications, and re-examined safehouse logs that hinted at Warisi's European circuits. Photographs were matched against older image libraries. Handwriting experts compared signatures on passports. Linguists parsed an intercepted phone call for a slip of local Italian slang that suggested an association in Rome. Technical teams ran simulations of transit routes and windows of vulnerability, the brief minutes when a target moved between platforms, stairwells, and carriages. Everything was mapped to time. Trains had rhythms, and rhythms have seconds where a plan can live or die. Cover stories were built like miniature lives. Operatives assumed identities with passports, rental agreements, and plausibly messy recent histories. Some would be tourists arguing about opera schedules. Others would be sharp-suited businessmen with credible phones and fake appointments. Every prop had to survive casual scrutiny. Backstops were prepared. A safe apartment in central Rome with curated trash, a fictitious address tied to a shell company in Milan, and caches disguised as routine expense funds. Local assets, fixers who knew which ticket booths closed early, which station bathrooms were locked, which carriage had the best sightlines, were quietly enlisted. Diplomacy mattered too. Handlers whispered to sympathetic consular staff to look the other way if certain documents were ever checked. Technical tradecraft became the nervous system of the operation. Teams rehearsed egress routes inside a training train purchased for mock runs on a decommissioned siding outside the city. Surveillance teams practiced taking positions that blended into commuters, a woman knitting, a man with a child, a couple arguing softly. Tiny radio packs with encrypted bursts kept coordination under 1-second latency. Photographers trained telelenses through fogged windows. Forensic technicians prepared tamper-proof evidence kits in case the operation needed plausible deniability, items that would later be found and point to a credible alternative explanation. The choice to intercept Warisi on a moving train was strategic. Trains limit the number of escape options and compress the geography of a target into a linear stage. In a carriage, there are only so many doors, and the crowd's movement can be subtly controlled. Unlike airports, where cameras proliferate and sovereignty issues multiply, a night express through Italy offered a quieter, more contained environment. Yet it demanded supreme precision. A moving target compresses margins for error to seconds, and any misstep could scatter witnesses across jurisdictions. The team accepted the trade-off because it offered a single slice of time in which control could be achieved and then dissolved before local authorities fully understood what had happened. Secrecy was enforced with brutal efficiency. Operational knowledge was compartmentalized. Only those who needed to know the itinerary were told the train number and carriage. Even among the operatives, names were reduced to call signs. Communications were routed through disposable satellite phones, scrubbed of identifying metadata. If anyone were detained or turned, they would know only a fraction of the plan. Briefings emphasized legal risk, the political fallout of being caught on sovereign soil, and trained agents in nonverbal cues to deflect casual questioning. They practiced leaving no trace. Clothes that could be quickly swapped, hair dyes, gloves, and a stash of unremarkable tickets to scatter across a seat. Tension was a constant undercurrent. Agents cycled between rehearsals and long bored waits disguised as espresso breaks. A single overheard word could reroute weeks of work. Every false lead demanded a recheck. Every successful tale that lasted more than a few hours raised the probability of exposure. Yet something colder drove them forward, a ledger of attacks and losses that, in their view, required closure. The team's emotional discipline was tested not by violence, but by patience. The hours when nothing happened and the minutes when everything could. When the final plan was sealed, the team synchronized watches down to the second and selected an innocuous moment to act. Between a minor station stop and a bridge crossing, where the carriage corridors narrowed and phone signals thinned. No one in Rome's underground command posts had been told. The operation would arrive like a ripple on still water, visible only to those who had been trained to see it. That was the logic. Move fast, leave questions behind, and let the city misread the rest. November 17th, 1982, 23:58. The Milan Express pulsed through Rome's outskirts. Rain hammered the roof in a steady metallic drum. Inside carriage 7, low lamps threw bands of gold across patterned seats. Warisi sat with a folded newspaper, one eye on the window, the other on the corridor. The train's wheels hurled white noise into the night. 23:59. In the vestibule 2 rows ahead, Agent Lambd checked his watch and whispered into an earpiece so soft the words dissolved into the carriage hum. His breath fogged in the cool air. Across the aisle, a woman with knitting needles pretended to frown at her pattern. Inside her sleeve, a pocketed transmitter blinked once every 30 seconds. 000. Synchronization complete. A tiny LED on the team's radio blinked green. The operational clock ticked to 0. Outside, a bridge made the train's rhythm stutter for 11 seconds, the window for action. The team inhaled as one. Every movement in the carriage became a measured variable. 0001. The agents unfolded their cover stories into practiced gestures. Tavolo libero, murmured one, a canned phrase, and the nearby traveler shifted, creating the cushion of privacy the operatives wanted. Lamed rose, buttoning his jacket with the economy of a man who'd done the motion thousands of times. Oro 2. Tactical positions were adjusted. A male agent, posing as a businessman, dropped a leather folder near Warisi's foot, a plausible mistake that directed the PLO chief's attention down. 2 operatives, seated behind, pivoted their knees to block the corridor exit subtly. A photographer angled a telelens at a darkened window, capturing every micro-expression. 003. The carriage lights dimmed as the train passed beneath a covered platform, a practice trick coordinated with the station schedule. Shadows lengthened. Lambd's fingers brushed a strap. The other hand found a concealed wrist holster. The click was inaudible beneath the rails, but it snapped through the agent as a physical cue. Move. 004. Warisi's head turned. He noticed the folder, then the agent's attention. In his eyes, a flicker of calculation and a seasoned awareness. This was not mere travel. He shifted, tightening his grip on the newspaper. The man had the look of someone who had rehearsed danger his entire life. 0005. A soft cough, a paper crinkle, the clipped clack of knitting needles, misdirection layered over precision. An agent murmured an Italian phrase that implied concern. Warisi answered in Arabic, low and steady, trying to maintain the outer calm. The team's linguist, 2 rows back, decoded the cadence in real time and fed it through the ear net. Warisi was unsettled, but not yet alarmed. 106. The corridor narrowed as the train entered a tunnel, phone signals attenuated. The team's comms shifted to encrypted burst mode. Timing contracted. Every second now compressed choices into micro-decisions. Lamed moved from feigned clumsiness into purposeful stride, his motion calibrated to the carriage sway. Euro 7. The lead operative approached with the smoothness of a practiced actor. He asked for a light, then used the shared gesture to close the gap between himself and Warisi. Their shoulders brushed. The duet of proximity and distraction allowed another agent to slide a folded paper, a fake summons, into Warisi's lap. Eyes met for a heartbeat. The operatives' faces were blank masks. Sorsha wait. Warisi stood. He smelled of tobacco and old paper. The scent registered like a fingerprint. He stepped toward the door as if to leave at the next stop. That was deliberate. A controlled move to the carriage threshold where exits could be contained. The agents converged, a trained phylogeny of motion designed to present a single overwhelming funnel. 09. The first physical contact was clinical and swift, a hand on the shoulder, a guiding squeeze at the elbow. No screaming, only the metallic whisper of two bodies becoming one tactical unit. Warisi resisted, enough to prove he was not a compliant civilian, but not enough to create chaos. The team folded around him like a net closing. 10. A flap of muffled voices, a whisper of Arabic. Warisi pivoted, attempting to reach for a hidden pocket. "Stay seated, signore," intoned an agent in accented Italian. The pocket yielded nothing immediately identifiable. Warisi's hands were quick but experienced. For a heartbeat, the operation teetered. Had they misread him, or was he bluffing? 0011. The operative assigned to secure identification produced a short, practiced set of moves and located a false passport. It bore a name and a plausible backstory, but not the right face for Warisi. Under the pressure and bright, rehearsed lights, real documents often surfaced as panic-cracked composure. Now Warisi's breath quickened. The team tightened their grip. 012. Outside, the train's undercarriage hummed into a station. The planned stop painted a sliver of risk. More witnesses, more cameras, more jurisdictional bodies. Lamed signaled to proceed. The plan allowed for a controlled disembarkation if necessary. The captain's voice over the PA announced the platform in Italian. A handful of passengers prepared to alight. Sorsha 13. The agents moved him toward the narrowest door, where a pressed schedule and the crush of exits made interference less likely. Each step was timed to the sway, to the closing of doors, to the rhythm of shoes on metal. Warisi's eyes darted. He mouthed a word into an empty seat, a code for an escape attempt that, to the team's relief, went unanswered. 014. A local commuter reached for the door. His hand brushed an operative's sleeve. The briefest contact could unravel everything. The agent smiled, murmured an apology, and deflected. Civilian indifference was the best camouflage. No one called for police. The night kept its confidence. 0015. With the carriage now at the platform edge, the operative leader made a decisive call: move off the train. The team flowed like water, compressing Warisi's options into a single path, a narrow exit corridor that led toward a planned rendezvous. The seconds bled into one another, hearts hammered in controlled staccato. 16. As they stepped down, Warisi attempted a final resistance, a shoving of elbows, a low kick, instincts flaring. The agents countered with restraint, not brutality, a forearm across the chest, a wrist twist that rendered an arm inert. The moment was clinical, devoid of triumph, heavy with purpose. 17. At the agreed safehouse van, waiting 2 cars away, operatives completed their roles with the same measured care. A door shut. A van's engine turned over. Within 60 seconds, the team and their prize were folding into a curated anonymity. The train resumed its journey past the platform, its lights sweeping empty seats where a man had once sat. 0.18. Mission accomplished. Warisi was in custody. The team exhaled but did not celebrate. Their faces remained shuttered behind operational discipline. They had executed the minute-by-minute choreography designed to minimize witnesses and maximize control. 19. Yet accomplishment was not the end, but the start of consequence. As the van melted into Rome's slick streets, every agent felt the weight of what had been done, a capture that would ripple through governments, intelligence briefs, and alleys where retaliations were planned. The operation had succeeded in its immediate objective, but the quiet victory already hummed with future reverberations. The news broke like a thrown stone. By dawn, Rome's front pages splashed the story across broadsheets and tabloids alike. A high-profile capture on an Italian train, cloaked in secrecy and contradiction. Television crews camped outside the station. Photographers traced the route back to a nondescript van. Headlines demanded answers. Who had the right to seize a man on foreign soil, and by what authority? Official voices reacted with immediate predictability and fury. Representatives of the PLO denounced the incident as a state kidnapping, accusing Israel of brazenly violating Italian sovereignty and international law. Their spokespeople used the capture to rally support, framing Warisi as a political prisoner and martyr in waiting. Sympathetic newspapers in the Arab world ran editorials condemning what they called extrajudicial aggression. In Jerusalem, spokesmen were circumspect. No overt claim, no public confession. Silence became a policy. Plausible deniability engineered to blunt diplomatic fallout, while internal channels buzzed with urgency. Italian authorities were forced into the spotlight. Rome's police announced an investigation into the sequence of events, citing questions about the van, the identities of the operatives, and whether local laws had been breached. In the halls of the foreign ministry, diplomats demanded briefings. Opposition politicians seized the moment to attack the government's handling of national security and border control. For Italy, this was both a law enforcement matter and a political headache, a sovereign embarrassment made larger by camera lenses and cable news cycles. Across Europe and in Washington, analysts parsed the capture for wider meaning. Some commentators praised the operational efficiency and argued that removing a dangerous intelligence node reduced the immediate threat to Israeli civilians. Others warned of the diplomatic cost. Any short-term security gain might seed long-term instability, pushing PLO networks to retaliate and forcing neutral states to tighten their own counterintelligence efforts. Intelligence circles privately debated whether the operation would trigger a new round of clandestine tit-for-tat measures across the continent. The aftermath quickly generated a tangle of arrests, denials, and propaganda. Italian police reportedly detained a handful of individuals, drivers, fixers, alleged document forgers, on suspicion of facilitating the operation. Some were released without charge, others held for questioning. Propaganda machines on both sides swung into gear. The PLO broadcast warnings of revenge and invoked international law, while whisper networks linked to Israeli sources leaked selective details intended to justify the operation's necessity. Academic commentators and human rights groups called for transparent inquiries. Intelligence professionals, writing off the record, emphasized the ruthless logic of counterterrorism, where legal niceties often collide with perceived existential threats. For ordinary citizens watching the headlines, the capture hardened narratives. In communities affected by the violence of the previous decade, some saw a necessary act of justice. In others, deepened grievance and fear. The event did not merely remove a single individual from a carriage. It forced a reckoning about the reach of state power, the limits of sovereignty, and the costs of secrecy in an age where every action could be televised and every protest amplified. The ripples of that night would travel far beyond the train's tracks, reshaping public opinion and the diplomatic calculations of capitals across the globe. As the days turned into weeks, the story of Fareed Warisi's capture began to splinter. What had initially been reported as a clean surgical arrest soon dissolved into competing narratives, each more intricate, more politically loaded than the last. In espionage, truth rarely survives the first retelling. One version, quietly circulated through diplomatic cables, and later echoed in Israeli memoirs, claimed that the operation was an extraordinary rendition sanctioned at the highest levels of government. According to this account, Mossad had coordinated indirectly with a handful of sympathetic Italian officials, ensuring that when the train incident occurred, local law enforcement would arrive just late enough to find nothing but confusion. The captured man, they insisted, was swiftly flown out of Italian airspace through a private airstrip near Fiumicino. his ultimate destination unknown. Perhaps an interrogation facility in Israel, perhaps elsewhere entirely. But another version, whispered through Arab intelligence channels, painted a darker picture. In this telling, Warisi never made it out of Italy alive. The confrontation on the train, they claimed, had gone wrong. A struggle, a brief scuffle, and a lethal miscalculation. His capture was merely a cover story. His body, according to rumor, was disposed of in the Tyrrhenian Sea before dawn. The PLO released statements demanding proof of life, but none came. Western newspapers, careful not to accuse directly, began to phrase headlines with hesitant words like allegedly, reportedly, believed to be. Italian investigators, caught between alliance and outrage, produced a third version, bureaucratic and ambiguous. Their official inquiry concluded there was insufficient evidence to determine who exactly carried out the operation. Witness testimonies conflicted. CCTV footage from the platform mysteriously disappeared. Several foreign nationals who might have been questioned abruptly left the country. In private briefings, some Italian officials admitted they suspected foreign involvement but lacked the political appetite to confront it publicly. The phrase "for reasons of state" appeared repeatedly in their internal reports. Academics and journalists later tried to reconcile the contradictions. Some pointed to parallels with other covert kidnappings in Europe during the 1980s. Patterns of forged travel documents, vanishing suspects, and silent diplomatic settlements. A few argued that the Rome operation exemplified the murky intersection between counterterrorism and criminal abduction, where legality is retrofitted after the fact. Human rights advocates labeled it a breach of international law. Intelligence veterans countered that conventional rules cannot govern unconventional enemies. Decades later, declassified fragments and memoirs offered hints but no certainty. A retired Italian security official admitted in an interview that the Israelis told us nothing, but we understood everything. Another source, formerly attached to Mossad's European desk, described Warisi as a necessary removal, but refused to clarify whether he had been executed or exchanged. Historians still debate which version holds weight. The moral fog remains thick. Was this justice, self-defense, or state-sponsored revenge? Can a democracy claim moral high ground while operating in shadows? Even today, the Warisi affair stands as a case study in the ethics of intelligence work, where truth, like a moving train, is glimpsed only in passing, blurred by speed and distance. Strategically, the Warisi operation achieved what it set out to do, and yet, in doing so, redrew invisible lines across intelligence maps and diplomatic trust. In the short term, Israel's security establishment celebrated quietly. Within weeks of the incident, several PLO-linked operations in Europe collapsed, funding pipelines froze, couriers went dark, and mid-level operatives fled to North Africa. It was as if a single removal had short-circuited an entire nervous system. The message was clear. The reach of the Mossad extended far beyond Middle Eastern borders, and sanctuary was an illusion. For Tel Aviv, the mission's immediate impact was deterrence. Western allies, though publicly silent, shared privately that attacks on Israeli targets across Europe noticeably declined in the following months. Intelligence assessments credited the Rome event, as it came to be known, with restoring Israel's reputation for efficiency and precision at a time when critics questioned its post-Lebanon war strategy. Internally, the operation reaffirmed the doctrine that offensive intelligence could achieve what open warfare could not: deterrence through omnipresence. Yet the political reverberations were less comfortable. Italy's government faced mounting pressure from Parliament and the public to explain how a foreign intelligence service had acted with apparent impunity on its soil. Rome lodged quiet protests through back channels, demanding assurances that such operations would not be repeated. Israel's responses were careful, couched in diplomatic platitudes about shared security concerns. The Americans, eager to preserve Middle Eastern stability and avoid public scandal, leaned on both sides to de-escalate. But trust had already been bruised. Italian intelligence began limiting cooperation on sensitive files, and European agencies tightened monitoring of suspected Mossad activities. For the PLO, Warisi's disappearance created both paralysis and propaganda. His absence fractured communication lines and morale, forcing reorganization under less experienced officers. But politically, his story became a rallying symbol, proof, in their eyes, that Israel's power had turned extrajudicial. Posters bearing his image appeared in refugee camps, and speeches in Tunis invoked his name alongside the word martyr. Thus, the operation that was meant to decapitate a network also gave birth to a narrative of victimhood that the PLO wielded effectively in the following years. Globally, intelligence communities studied the case like a masterclass in precision and a cautionary tale in diplomacy. For Britain's MI6 and France's DGSE, the Rome incident underscored the growing boldness of unilateral operations within NATO territory. Within the CIA, internal memos debated whether the benefits of targeted abductions outweighed the long-term diplomatic corrosion they caused. The consensus was pragmatic. Operational success does not always translate to strategic gain. In retrospect, analysts often liken the Warisi affair to a chess move that sacrifices one piece to control the board's tempo. Militarily, it neutralized an adversary. Politically, it strained alliances. Strategically, it pushed covert warfare further into the moral gray zone where legality and necessity blur. The idea that a train in a friendly European capital could become the setting for an international manhunt altered perceptions of sovereignty itself. In Israel's intelligence circles, the operation became a case study, a success in execution, a warning in consequence. As one retired operative later put it, "We proved we could reach anyone. But afterward, we learned the world was watching much closer than before." The capture of Fareed Warisi did not end a conflict. It reshaped the terrain on which that conflict would continue, unseen but unforgotten. Over time, the Warisi operation faded from the headlines but refused to die in the archives. In Israel, it became a whispered legend within intelligence circles, a benchmark for precision, patience, and deniability. Within the PLO, it became an open wound, retold through songs, memoirs, and whispered conversations among exiles in Tunis, Damascus, and Beirut. Two nations remembered the same event in entirely different colors. One as justice served, the other as a crime unpunished. Books and documentaries began surfacing in the 1990s, each claiming to uncover the truth about the night in Rome. Former agents hinted at details without confirmation. Historians drew lines between declassified documents and speculative interviews. The Israeli journalist Alon Regev called it a story told in fragments, where every fact is both proof and misdirection. Italian filmmakers dramatized the incident, depicting Warisi as a tragic revolutionary betrayed by a lover, while Western thrillers borrowed elements of the plot for fiction. By the early 2000s, the Rome train affair had become a cultural shorthand for the moral labyrinth of modern espionage. In military academies, the operation entered case studies under topics like covert rendition tactics and sovereignty in counter-terror operations. Analysts emphasized its flawless timing and intelligence preparation while debating its legality. Some instructors praised the mission's discipline. Others warned that such acts, if repeated, erode the very democratic principles the operatives claimed to defend. The dual legacy of the Warisi hunt thus became part of Israel's own internal discourse: efficiency versus ethics, necessity versus restraint. Controversy, however, never fully settled. Each anniversary of the event sparked renewed arguments. Arab media outlets called for the release of classified evidence or acknowledgement of Warisi's fate, while Western commentators framed it within the ongoing debate about targeted killings and international law. Even within Israel, retired intelligence officers occasionally questioned whether the long-term diplomatic costs outweighed the gain of removing one man. In the broader historical memory, Fareed Warisi became less a person than a mirror, reflecting whatever truth each side needed. For the PLO, he was a martyr of sovereignty. For Mossad, a ghost who proved the necessity of vigilance. And for historians, the operation in Rome stands as one of the last great analog missions of the Cold War era, executed with precision but haunted by its moral shadow. So what truly changed that night on the rain-soaked rails of Rome? The train moved on, the passengers slept, and a man disappeared into history. But the consequences continued to echo. The Warisi operation proved that even in a world defined by laws and borders, intelligence agencies could still bend reality into silence. It was a tactical masterpiece, but every masterpiece leaves a scar. Israel's victory came not in explosions or headlines, but in whispers, yet whispers carry. The mission hardened Israel's belief in proactive defense, in striking first and asking forgiveness later. But it also fed a darker paradox. How far can a democracy go in defending itself before it begins to resemble the forces it fears? The Rome train showed that line to be perilously thin, shifting with every justification of necessity. For Italy, the memory lingered as a lesson in vulnerability, that foreign agents could turn a simple passenger train into an arena of geopolitical consequence. For the PLO, Warisi's fate became a parable of sacrifice and endurance, a symbol that even in defeat, stories can outlive those who vanish. And for the silent operatives who carried out the mission, it became a mark of professionalism shadowed by doubt, success bought with secrecy, loyalty purchased with moral weight. Today, the world still wrestles with the same dilemma that pulsed through that train's dim corridors. Can a nation defend itself without eroding the principles it claims to uphold? The tools are more sophisticated, the justifications more rehearsed, but the questions remain timeless. If this story fascinated you, subscribe and turn on the bell. We're just getting started. More untold histories of espionage, hidden wars, and vanished men await. Because in the world of intelligence, every ending is only another beginning.